Okay, next let's talk about inspection. This is an interesting area, I think, that really gets the attention of a lot of people, especially any sort of kind of constitutional or criminal defense lawyers, when you talk about the right of someone to come on your farm and inspect where you're growing hemp. First of all, the license holder has to be able to produce a hemp license upon request. And so if law enforcement were to ask you for your license and you have hemp in your possession, you need to be able to produce that license. Additionally, by getting a license holder consents to entry on and inspection of all locations identified in the application and all land where hemp or other cannabis plants or materials are located. So understand that just by having the license, you are consenting to entry on and inspection of anywhere where your hemp is growing or where hemp or any other cannabis plants or materials are located. So be aware of that kind of implied consent by result of getting the license. Additionally, law enforcement agencies, including TDA, DEA, DPS, the U.S. authorities, and local law enforcement, have complete and unrestricted access to all hemp plants, whether growing or harvested, all facilities used for the production or storage of hemp, and all locations where hemp is produced or handled. And they have the right to access that with or without cause and with or without advance notice. So, right, kind of from a Fourth Amendment perspective, this is where constitutional lawyers' ears perk up a little bit, because essentially what this says is, right, you are kind of waiving your right to be free from search and seizure. If you get a license to produce hemp, and law enforcement agents have the right to come on your property for any areas and any facilities where hemp is growing, harvested, or that's used in the production of storage of hemp without probable cause, right? They just have the automatic right to do that. So again, beware that that is something that will affect your constitutional rights should you choose to get a license to produce hemp in the state of Texas. Let's talk next about sampling. So every lot is going to have to be sampled. And so when we're looking at someone's operation, you're going to have to take samples from each lot prior to harvest. The hemp has to be sampled and tested within 15 days of harvest. That's how the current Texas Department of Agriculture rule reads. However, I will tell you that in January of 2021, the USDA released its final hemp rule, which amends the USDA rule from that 15-day harvest window to a 30-day harvest window. And while TDA hasn't made that change yet, I would expect that we may see a change in Texas as well. So I would keep an eye on that harvest window and see if that's a modification that may be coming from TDA. The sampling has to be done either by TDA or by a TDA licensed representative. And the producer or a producer representative does have to be present at the time of sampling. Now, in Texas, again, the TDA rules as they currently read, there's sampling procedures that are outlined in the regulations that correspond with those procedures that were included in the USDA interim final hemp rule. It really talks about the number of cuttings that have to be taken per lot, for example. And so, by way of example, in the TDA rules, if there's less than 10 acres, there have to be the cuttings from 5 plants to make one sample. If it is over 10 acres, you have to use the pesticide residue sampling formula that's laid out in the rules. Again, this is an area where we may see some change because the USDA final rule amends the requirements to allow some additional flexibility. States are permitted to take kind of a performance-based approach, which lets them consider other factors in deciding how they want to do the sampling process. So keep your eye open to see if there's any changes in the sampling process. Okay, another change in that USDA final rule, it modified where samples were taken from the plant and it basically allows you to take more stems and leaves as part of the sampling material. The interim final rule said that you had to take from the top third of the plant. The final USDA rule says that it can be taken from the flowering tops of the plant by cutting 5 to 8 inches from the main stem, the terminal bud, or the central cola. And so, like I say, that is going to allow you to get more of the non-flowering portion of the plant in the testing. So again, right now, that's not written as part of the TDA rules, but keep an eye out and see if those rules are modified given the modification of the USDA rule. Okay, next let's talk about testing for THC content. First of all, it's extremely important to understand you may not sell or use harvested plants until they have been tested for THC content. Okay? And the rule technically requires testing by a lab that's registered with both the TDA and the DEA, which is the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. So it requires the lab to have that registration. The producer gets to choose any lab that meets those qualifications. Now, in the last growing season, both USDA and TDA suspended this requirement. And in the USDA new final rule continues that suspension through 2022. So again, keep an eye and see if there are modifications to the TDA regulations. You might also check the TDA Hemp website. It previously had this exemption listed, and given that approach by the USDA, I would expect to see TDA take similar action for the 2021 growing season and allow just for a TDA registered lab to be used. So what the test is going to determine is if the crop is within the acceptable hemp THC level. Essentially what it's going to do, it's going to measure the amount of THC present in the plant, but it's also going to include what the rule calls measurement uncertainty. So essentially it kind of gives you a measurement and then it gives you a range, right? Almost like a margin of error on either side. And the way that the rule basically works is so long as 0.3 is included somewhere in that range of measurement uncertainty, the crop is within the acceptable THC level and it's good to go and be harvested. So let's just use an example. Let's say that there's a crop that tests at 0.35% THC, right? 0.35 is over the 0.3 limit, right? So people are getting nervous. But then you've got to look and see what the measurement uncertainty is. For our example, let's say that it was a 0.06 measurement uncertainty, all right? Because that would put the range from 0.29 to 0.41, right? Because what we're doing is we're looking at 0.06 below and 0.06 above, gets us to 0.29 to 0.41. Because 0.3 is within that range, the crop is within the acceptable THC level, despite the fact that it measured above 0.3. So essentially that measurement uncertainty just gives a little bit of extra room to a producer to make sure they fit within the acceptable hemp THC level. And of course, this is one of the most important provisions in the rules because if you don't fit within that acceptable level, that's where you're looking at potentially having to deal with crop destruction, because at that point it would be illegal to produce and sell the product because it wouldn't be considered hemp if it measured with a THC outside of that acceptable level. Additionally, the testing method has to consider what's called the total THC content. Okay, so, and this was something that's been really commented on to both TDA and the USDA. Folks weren't thrilled with this, but they have to measure both the current THC level in the plants, but additionally the THC acid, which is an acid in the plant that can potentially convert into THC. So the measurement being taken is the total THC, which is THC plus THCA for acid. That gives you the total level. And again, that was something that a lot of folks have filed comments seeking to change. It was not changed in the USDA final rule, and it was also not changed in the TDA rule when it went final. So what happens if you do this testing and your hemp tests hot, right above that 0.3% THC level? The producer has 5 days to request a retest. So once you get those results, you've got 5 days to act and ask for a retest if that's something that you want to do. 5 days is quick turnaround, so you really are going to need to pay attention when you submit hemp for testing. The retesting is going to have to be done from the same sample, by the same lab. So you don't get to resample, you don't get to choose another lab, right? Same sample, same lab, and then the retest results are going to be final. Now, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, there was a change in the USDA rule that will allow for the potential remediation of a hot crop by removing some of the flowering material, by potentially shredding it and creating biomass. That has not been addressed yet by the TDA regulations. I don't know how that option is going to change the ability of a producer to have a retest done or what that timeline looks like. So again, I just want to flag that issue for you. If that's something you're looking at, the remediation, you'll need to see if it gets adopted by TDA and if they alter these rules as far as retesting and that 5-day window.